an agency ready to manage a piece of that Annie and Mary. So therefore, as an example, we could get something going just by virtue of what council gave us advice as to a lease arrangement we could do. I agree. I thought you said that that may not be even doable because of some other of the property interest in and around it. Then is that what you were referring to inside the city limits?
Well, along the track is there as an easement. The easement says for a railroad. Now that means if you want to use it for a trail, you have to go find that property owner and pay them to upgrade the easement so you can do a trail. So it would be very difficult to just write an agreement with the city of Blue Lake because I'm saying you don't have the power to do that. Now, there are also, while it's in the city of Blue Lake, I think everybody's, hey, nice, we're going to do this. I do know of property owners outside of the city. Some of them are very well-to-do that do not want a trail where the railroad used to be. And so if you try and just say, well, we have the right, we can do it, I know that a couple of those are going to take you to court to say, no, you have a railroad easement. But you avoid that by rail banking. And I don't, this board should not get into the argument whether the people want one or there's some people that don't. That would be a local issue. And it's just by rail banking, you give the locals the ability to make that choice.
Thank you, John, for clarification. If I could go one more step now, and then would be to say is that I think since we've already taken action by a previous board, that action still stays on the books. So we really have given direction to go towards creating a trail there. I think that the rail banking procedure really then has been pretty well laid out, unless council has another thought on it, which we should hear. I think we also have, by letter from Mr. Murray, a stand-up group of individuals that could do much of the legwork for us. I think it has to be, unfortunately, one of those things where we definitely want to do, but the expectancies of becoming the manager, I worry about that part. Because while with your chart, nothing really changes, what does change is that then the community sees that NCRA is managing this piece for a trail. And so somehow we've got to get to that part where a sponsored group that has the long-term viability, and it could be another JPA model, separate from just the larger one we're working at, or part of it. But somehow they got to work in concert. We have to get it in that position. But it's going to take some time to get the rail banking procedure underway anyway. So if we can figure out a game plan that puts us all on that pathway within the community, then I think this board is already on board with moving in that direction. And just giving that general direction and using the offer to help us out would be my interest at this point. So I'll allow the rest of my board members.
Thank you, John.
Director Kelly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, in looking at the letter from the City of Blue Lake, the first paragraph makes an assertion that gets contradicted later about that this is a formerly abandoned and rail banked Arcata Mad River Railroad. Later it says that we haven't done it yet. So I don't know if that was just a misstatement by the writer of the letter or not. Second of all, Mr. Murray, you mentioned that there's since this is easement land, not fee title land, that precludes sort of us having an agreement for trails there, because we have an easement that is, my understanding that an easement can be for a single purpose, in this case a rail line. But if there is there an APN numbers for the easement? Does that have meets and bounds when you looked at those APNs? Because I'm a little confused that you could have an APN or at least a parcel map for an easement while you had the survey crew out there running another APN to the center of the tracks.
There is an assessor's parcel number for the railroad through there. There is also on that strip this PUC number. I have looked at the original deeds, and they're very hard to locate because they say along the line that was already set, or so far from some road that is not really described that well. So where it is, you've got to go out to the existing property lines, and in Blue Lake it's very easy to find where we're looking at. But
outside the limits, it might be a little bit harder.
it's, yeah, well, the old road bed is there, to tie it down, as long as we stay in the middle where the tracks were, because this trail's supposed to be 10 feet wide, and there was 30 feet, I mean, we would be all right. But I don't know if I've answered your question, because I really didn't totally understand it.
How would you determine, do we know that the easement's 30 feet wide?
Yes, that's in the deeds.
Is that in the APN number specifically or APN description as it relates to the rail line?
Okay, I have to tell you, the assessor's parcel maps have nothing to do with legality.
I understand.
Okay. Whether it specifically says 30 feet, it certainly looks like it's 30 feet wide. I don't know whether there's a number there.
Let me rephrase it. Do you know if there's a physical meets and bounds description of the easement?
No, there is not.
In an abandonment and rail banking proceedings, would there be a necessity to have meets and bounds of what exactly we are abandoning and rail banking?
My understanding at this time is no. You have to have the limits from post mile, 295.57 to wherever it is going to be on the other end. And then you have to publish notices to only certain people. You don't even have to notify the property owners. And that's what makes it good, because in some instances, we don't know who the property owner is on one side where we do on the other.
I guess as those are in any sort of abandonment and rail banking proceedings, that would have to be fleshed out, my guess. Do we know if when the PUC condemned a pair of 100-year-old wooden trestles, thereby, as this stated in his letter, ending the rail use, is that a de facto abandonment? And maybe council might be able to answer.
No.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I would really concur with Director Woolley's comments from the perspective that this board has acted to at least pursue the option of use of this line. I do have concerns about the necessity to have a manager for the line as part of the rail banking proceedings, specifically this agency being that manager, and would hope that as we collect the information necessary to do it, that we would also look at those kind of issues of who would be the manager, who would be the most likely manager. I do think questions like in a proceedings, what are the meets and bounds of what exactly we're doing, I kind of find it hard to believe that we wouldn't have to have some information as it relates to that if we would go forward with it. So I appreciate, Ms. Murray, your research and background information, and I could only imagine the number of bits of information that you accumulated to come to this point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The directors?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to give my thanks to Director Woolley, who gave me the opportunity to research this issue. And indeed, I went back to the STB, Surface Transportation Board in Washington, back in early March, and had answers to pretty much all the questions that were asked. And I had additional issues that Friends of A&M could look at. I'm pretty sure that the NCRA does own the right-of-way from Arcata to Blue Lake, and I have a piece of paper which I'll be pleased to share with the Friends of A&M and anybody else in the public, and I got that from the STB in March. Heather, are those papers available? Could you give a copy of that to Mr. Murray? I'm going to include some other stuff as well. I do want to say that this deals only with the line from Arcata to Blue Lake. It doesn't deal with anything south of Arcata, and all the discussion we had this morning, which I found quite interesting as to whether we should have rails and trails, etc., from Arcata south, is unaffected by this. And as my fellow directors have pointed out, we dealt with this at the January 9 meeting and apparently years ago, and I'm glad to see the board still thinks that we should go ahead with this. Rail banking is like putting the right-of-way in trust. It formally preserves the right-of-way while allowing the NCRA to take it back if and when we want to, for any reason. It is all protected in addition by federal law. Meanwhile, the right-of-way can be used in a manner which the public would like. Now, despite the fact that the word abandoned has been used here, and in fact abandon is used in the application that deals with rail banking, we aren't abandoning the line. Instead, it conveys temporarily this right-of-way and our explicit right to take it back when and if we see fit. My thanks to Messrs. Murray and Hauser for their very cogent and exacting testimony. There was an issue raised as to how much time it would take to get this going, and I believe Mr. Murray put his finger on it. As soon as the application is made, there's a very short window to have a proposed manager step in, and that's a 10-day period, I believe. And the amount of time it will take the NCRA to get its application together is minimal or de minimis. We could conceivably do it by the time we meet here next, although probably take a little bit more effort because you want to make sure you're doing it right. But there's very little time, and there's no cost other than what Mr. Neary might put in. And I'm going to volunteer to do the first draft and let Mr. Neary look at it, and friends of Annie and Mary look at it. And you pay me nothing for my time, which is twice what I'm worth. And there's no cost that the STB imposes on us because we're a state organization. There is a cost otherwise. To Director Kelly, I believe that Mr. Murray was correct, that we only need to describe the post miles, not the meets and bounds, to satisfy the STB, Surface Transportation Board. Now, as it turns out, you may not have post-mile markers, and they understand that, and you can describe it in other ways, which I'm sure the county is able to do readily, from such and such a point to such and such a point. But you don't need the meets and bounds. I agree with the position taken by the prior directors, that is, let's see what we can do, or what can be done as to who or what the manager would be. That's an important issue, and that's why it's going to take a little time to figure this out. And back in January, Director Woolley said, let's look at a JPA. We have the Friends of Annie and Mary. Somehow or other, there should be something available to step into the agencies, the authority's shoes for the manager. Now, we received from the Friends of Annie and Mary some material. I must say, while the material was correct generally, it's dated. And I'm providing to Mr. Murray now something called Overview, Abandonments and Alternatives to Abandonments. Note that Alternatives to Abandonments, that's published by the STB. It's dated April 1997, and a new one of these will be coming out within the next year that tells you rather explicitly how to go ahead with the application and what its implications are. And we've pretty much heard that today. And I'm going to also provide, to whomever wants it, something called NCHRP, rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? Synthesis 374, it's put out by the Transportation Research Board, and it also deals with the issue of abandonment and an alternative to abandonment, rail banking. And I think then folks will see that the things that they want to look at are covered by what is known as CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. It's one that everybody just loves. And if you look at section 11.52 and some of its subsections, most particularly 11.52.29, you'll see that it's rather simple to file for abandonment and rail banking, and the timelines involved and the like. And John Woolley was absolutely correct. Ms. Bittner is just an absolute gem. She is everything you want to see in a federal civil servant. Her view of her job is to make things as best as she possibly can for the general public, and not put up roadblocks. And if you call her or write her or email her, I expect you'll get a very prompt answer back as to how you should proceed with respect to a particular issue. So as you can see, I think that what my fellow directors have said is absolutely correct. I must say I didn't know very much about rail banking 2 or 3 months ago, but I'm a little bit up to speed and agree heartily. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Myers, and I think we all owe you some gratitude for taking the time while you were back there to do it. Are there any other board comments?
If not,
Any of the other directors?
Were we going to have public comment?
We are. I want to get staff's input on this first, and then we'll go to public comment. Did you have a comment?
I'll save it for after public comment.
John, did you
no,
have?
I wanted you to say.
Chris, you've been in and out of this thing, and Mitch, do you have any comments?
Not really. I think that the thing that would be important is to get some definition of exactly what our interest is in the property. I don't think that we have a handle on that as we sit here right now. Several different opinions. There's several different factors which influence that, and I think that that's nothing that would detract from moving forward. But I think the first step ought to be to look at each of the deeds and at least make a determination of what the property interest is held by NCRA is, because that could have some impact. It may be that there would be an easier way to accomplish the objective, which is to have a trail, than rail banking. And so typically you want to follow the path of least resistance. There might be other factors, liability. We've had the liability for many years. There might be other factors that would push you toward a direction of proceeding with a formal regulatory proceeding for the STB. But in terms of accomplishing the objective, it may be that we have a sufficient property interest in and of, as it sits right now, to just give permission to the developers of the trail through a license or a lease to use it as a trail. I've looked at the deeds over this section some time ago for some other reason. I forget what it was. But they're all handwritten deeds from the 1880s, and they're very, in fact, as I understand it, this is the oldest railroad line in the state of California. And it's typical of railroad right-of-ways that there's a very complicated array of issues as to what the nature of the ownership interest is. Many of these conveyances will refer to terms such as this conveyance is given the purposes of a right-of-way for railroad purposes, and variations of those words, and those variations and believe me, all these deeds were written by different attorneys or different property owners at different times in the 1880s. They stated it in different ways, and each way that the conveyance is stated has some major significance. There was a case in 1996. It's called City of Manhattan Beach versus Southern Pacific. It's a California Supreme Court case, and it was 96 or 97. And it's a very complex case, but essentially it reached the conclusion that just because something says right-of-way, that doesn't necessarily mean it's an easement when it comes to deeds for railroad purposes. Sometimes when it says right-of-way, it means a conveyance of a fee. Sometimes it means it's a conveyance of an easement. You have to define the intent from the four corners of the document. But in the absence of being able to determine that intent, the presumption is in favor of the transfer of a fee interest. So the net result of all that may be is that although these deeds or conveyances refer to right-of-way, which is typically the language you use for an easement, it may well be that we have a fee ownership interest in some or maybe even a majority of parcels, which would have some major significance in accomplishing the desired result. If we have just easement interests, and let me just back up and say that the STB is implementing a national policy in rail banking. The property issues are determined by state law. So you have, it's very common to have intersection of federal and state law, and sometimes it's like, two plates, geologic plates rubbing up against each other, and it causes earthquakes. The property law is determined by California law, and so that the California Supreme Court case I referred to becomes the place which you go to first and weigh each of these conveyances, and I bet you there's 75 of them for that area. And if you, that analysis has never been done. Now, when this has come before the board several times before, we've agreed to proceed with the concept. And I think this board has long been in favor of the concept of that property being transformed to a trail at the earliest opportunity. And I assume that policy hasn't changed. And so that's the policy of this board that's guided the staff. But when this issue's come before us before, there was an organization, and I forget the name of it, but there was a chapter of a national organization which promotes trails. And they had some they had a grant actually with some attorneys that were going to provide the legal work to make the determination of exactly where we were, and they were going to give that information to us. And the idea being that we weren't going to be stuck with the cost or the expense of that analysis. I think that in terms of where do we go from here, we've got an attorney on the board that's volunteering, that we might just sit down and pull these deeds out, read the case, and at least develop an opinion or some information to this board of exactly what we have, and to also finalize the issue of whether or not there really has been abandonment or not. There seems to be two different opinions about that. It's never been, I think that needs to be resolved. I mean, it sounds like there's somebody, as Ms. Bittner is saying, that there's been no abandonment. We've seen the document that looks like it's an abandonment document, and it was published in the Federal Register. So, we've got that issue also. But I think there might be, even if there has already been an abandonment and that the rail banking procedure would not be available for that reason, there'd be two other ways you would approach it. One is you could maybe seek a rescission of the abandonment decision, which has been published in the Federal Register. Or two, just proceed with a direct conveyance to some nonprofit entity such as, or maybe even the city of Blue Lake or some custodian of the property interest and residual property that was held by this agency. So I'd suggest that what we should do in terms of getting this thing moving to something other than just a concept, that Bernie and I work together and come back, bring it back to you. It may involve some expense of consulting of land engineering firm or surveyor, but we certainly could run the cost by you before we incur it. To bring back a statement of exactly where we are, and I think that's, once we have a firm grasp of that, then I think the rest of it will fall into place fairly easy, because I think there's a pretty firm resolve to make this happen.
Bernie, who's on the property committee? Are you on the property committee?
I think I'm on the, not on.
I was just trying to think of some, well, I'm not even sure we need a committee. You have John working here with the group locally. Your offer to pick up the pace to keep the load from putting more on Chris's plate, when he's already got plenty in. If we can keep Mitch out of the fray as much as possible and use, again, if John Murray would be willing to be kind of an extension of our staff, and I'll give him a bottle of wine if he'll do that.
I don't drink.
Oh, a bottle of Pepsi.
I'll take it.
7 up, I got another taker. Okay, you're in, Bernie. So, I think we can string this thing together. What's the sense of when it would come back for a report to the board? I mean, is it logical to assume we might have something clear at the next meeting?
I think it would take longer than that.
Okay.
I would suggest it would be about 60 days to put that together. We'd have to assemble those deeds and here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then we're talking about a process to evaluate that, and the question of whether in fact an abandonment took place. And there's one other thing I'd like to see looked at, and we're getting ahead because I want to get some public comment in here. I think there's two other questions. First, we have an operator who we don't have any legal obligation on this thing too, but assuming we ever did get operating up here, when we get operating up here at some point, it's logical to assume that there would be some interest on his part as to what the outcome of this would be. So before we're through, John, I'd like your comments, if you choose to offer any or not. Then the other issue is, if there is fee simple real estate here, there's value to it. And the question is, how do we view that value? And that should be addressed in the context of the discussion, because it is an asset that we have fiduciary responsibility for.
Mr. Chairman, the Finance Committee met 2 weeks ago, and there's a report scheduled in the regular agenda. But some of the points you're raising right now about the value of real estate as a source of revenues was discussed, and there was some direction that came out of that telephone conference. I don't mean to complicate this at this time, but there was the real recommendation from the Finance Committee that a property specialist or a property manager, or whatever the term might be in this context, be brought on board, or at least explored as a possibility. I wonder if this overlaps that, because that's pretty much the report of the Finance Committee those few sentences. And I wonder if this is a point at which we would want to fold this into this undertaking, or let's keep it separate for...
Well, I think the issue, David, would be there is no value if it's just an easement, but if there's fee simple ownership there, I think it's just something that needs to be addressed in the context of this basket.
Of this particular,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
And it may ripple over into your world, but right
We'll
now.
consider that
we
later,
don't know.
right.
So, yeah, all right. John?
Yeah, just to add one, Jen Rice is here, who works for Redwood Community Action Agency, was the agency that, under which Jen's tutelage actually put together the 1997, I think it is, year for the Annie and Mary report. I think that's the year. However, it's a...
2003, John.
Thank you, that's it.
Yeah.
2003, was it? 2003?
Yes.
Thanks. 97 was another study beforehand on feasibility study. So at least that is also something to put in the mix, because it may have some of the bearing that we should also include. I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I think it's safe to say we don't need to be convinced again. We're on record as a matter of policy. I think we've reinforced that and developed a roadmap here. And we certainly want to offer, if there's any other public comment, that we don't need to be sold, I think, on this thing at this point. So feel free to say something, but unless it's adding something new.
I am concerned about the staff time, as you are. And we're looking at a budget that still has some deficit numbers coming up. So having, seeing where hard costs might be required in a certain juncture, either hiring staff or whatever, I think we're going to have to examine that and to see if maybe the Friends or others can help pony up dollars. If we can have a marriage of some sort, be more than conceptually, that allows for them to put money into something. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, but maybe we can figure out a process that get us to that as well.
Tom, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm going to reverse my decision to wait until public comment. First of all, I want to say that I am extremely supportive of this. I had the pleasure of actually taking a tour last night of the Annie and Mary, thanks to John Murray. And it's an exceptional piece of property. It'll make a great trail. And I got a great tour of the back roads of Humboldt that probably only John knows, those back roads. But I do have a couple of concerns and they've already been raised to some degree, but I do have a concern with us acting as manager. It supposedly would be an interim, passive sort of management, but sometimes interim turns into more than interim, and passive isn't always passive if we end up possibly creating expectations on the part of citizens that the NCRA is the manager, and therefore, if nothing's getting done, we become the place where the buck stops if we're the manager. There's also the potential for some expense involved. So I do share some other people's concerns with that, and I would hope that there would be some other way of going about that. Which kind of gets us to the second concern that I have that we haven't really addressed yet, but probably the Friends of the Annie and Mary need some sort of definite action out of us as they're going out trying to raise funds, or wherever they're going to try and put this together. They need some firm commitment from us that indeed this will be, whether it's rail banked, sold, whatever. And I'm a little concerned that whatever we passed in 1997, which was the support of trails, is the way I understand it. And that's good, and I agree with that, but that may not be quite enough for them. And I'd like to hear from them on that. Maybe we have to, when we come back to this in a couple of months, be able to pass a different resolution that says we are committed to rail banking, or we're committed to some very specific process. They may need that sort of assurance in order for them to be able to go to whoever they're having to go to raise money, get commitments. And a 1997 resolution that says we're in favor of trails might not be sufficient. And that's a concern I'd like to have us address or hear from them. What do they need from us? And maybe they come back to us in 2 months with exactly what they need.
Well, to that point, I think what we've decided this morning is the second stage of evolution of what we decided in 1990, whatever it was. The next phase would be a board action, an agenda item based on receiving a report from Bernie and the kind of ad hoc committee here, to embark on a course of action based on the information they give us. So I think that's the view that I see. So I think we should be prepared to take action once we have the facts that allow us to take that action, including some of the financial ramifications that some other people have mentioned here. So that I think that's where we're headed here, unless somebody has a different view. Okay, well, let's go to some public comment. Again, if we could be thrifty on our time, we're investing quite a bit in this, and it's important.
My name again is Noe Bittner. I live in Eureka, and I'm speaking to you now as the president of Trails Trust of Humboldt Bay. We have large, broad membership and are very supportive of this process that's going on there in Blue Lake and the Annie and Mary trails. As a matter of fact, we use some of our funding from our membership dues to help support some of their needs, give them a little bit of cash to do some of their planning, and we're also involved in fundraising to help raise the money to do the pre-planning and the preparation for the grant submittal for the $50 million grant that was mentioned earlier. I give you that as a background because we're also in a position to help in this effort. We'd like to think that there's a way that we could participate in a way that would make this process move along, and perhaps that may even include, as without going before my board, the possibility of the management. I mean, I would love to hear more of what's detailed in being a manager, so we could really understand what the implications are in terms of liability and cost and those sort of things, because there may be that opportunity there within our own organization. Just to wrap up, I'd like to thank Director Woolley and Director Myers and the fond retired Mr. Murray for all their efforts and energy put into this, because basically that's what it takes. It takes a lot of extra time and effort on everybody's part, as we all know, and being part of a foundation or a nonprofit, I can appreciate the effort and energy that you put in on your own time. So thank you very much, and we look forward to working with you.
Sid Berg again, Building Trades. I would like to take Bernie Myers's, or Director Myers's statement that this will only affect Annie Mary right away, and our fear is that we're starting on a slippery slope here. If this works out well for that portion, it may be tried to be carried over on the track between Arcata and Eureka, and that would be devastating to this community. One thing I would also urge the board to consider is there's a compost manufacturing plant right there on West End Road. West Green, I believe, owns it. And that's a possible haul for a future rail link from Arcata into Humboldt Bay and into even southern Humboldt, moving compost out of there. So I would strongly urge not to abandon that portion of the railroad. Make sure that you consider that in your process. Thank you.
My name is Sam King. I'm from McKinleyville. My official address is about 3 miles west of McKinleyville. I'm actually 3 miles from, I'm closer to Fieldbrook. And my bicycle route...
That's east.
Pardon me?
That's east of McKinleyville.
Yes, you're correct. I'm sorry. East or west, maybe that's why I get lost. What I want to say is I want to thank you for, this seems to be headed in a wonderful direction. Speaking personally for me, I'll be able to take off from where I live in McKinleyville and go 3 miles east to Fieldbrook and then continue on, instead of having to take 299, link up with 101 to get to Arcata and markets and so on. I'll be able to hopefully get on the bottom half of this trail and be in a safer position. It'll be a safer route for me, so thank you. I encourage this.
Marcus Brown. I do live in Arcata. First, I'm doing this on Pete Oranger's time. He had to leave, so he asked me to say something in regards to what he'd said earlier in saying that the cities all were on record saying that they wanted to return to rail service. He wanted to add that they've also said that an unused portion, I guess, referring to the Annie and Mary for trail use, they also supported. So anyway, he wanted me to say that for him. I want to say my own past background was I have a degree in forestry, and I was kind of at the birth of what we now know as the Arcata Community Forest. And in those very early years of taking the mandate that was a proposition passed by the citizens of Arcata to manage the Arcata Community Forest for both production of timber and recreation, it was a difficult thing to work all out. In the end, we have certified wood products and a place that the community uses for recreation. Similarly, that's the kind of outlook that I look at for this railroad, that we want to have both the recreational use and the support for creating jobs and industrial type things. And looking at, we have trees growing on the landscape of this area. The timber companies have consolidated down to basically Simpson is the one big timber company in this area with the massive holdings. And one of the biggest a major sawmill is out there at Corvell. And that's why the Arcata Mad River, beyond being started as the wharf railroad out into the bay, was then built outward and reached Corvell. And so I would say one of the ideas that was advanced of just turning over the land to the trails use, that brings up concern. The idea that the trail is developed with the ability to one day bring back rail service to what could be a major shipper. One of the facts I remember was that you can ship timber from Seattle to Southern California cheaper by rail than we can from here to Southern California. So I would ask the Annie and Mary people, if you can design this trail, keep in mind in a way that it is, would help facilitate the future return one day, so you don't make it on, so we don't have to destroy trail to return rail. Thinking ahead of having both, as I try to keep saying, the win-win of both the recreational uses and the jobs and industrial uses, that would be a good thing. I just was in Italy for 2 weeks, and I was curious to see how a country with even higher gas prices, importing a lot more stuff than we do, reacts to that. I was surprised to not see much in the way of bicycle use, actually. What I saw was really little cars, they call them smart cars, that instead of parallel parking, you just dead end right into the curb. I saw a lot of motor scooters, and now returning home, I'm watching all the motorcycles that are increasing number going by my house. So, the way this whole thing of increased energy prices and so on, all the different multitude and complexities that we're going to be addressing, different people advance different ideas. I think it's going to be way more complex than any one simple point of view says. And we've got to keep our options open. In other words, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater by saying we want to, help save energy and give us alternatives by building a trail, but we're going to destroy our ability to have a railroad too. That just does not make sense to me. We need to have all our things open, because what I saw in Italy was they're increasing all over Europe. They're increasing railroad building, and the railroads really hit the low point at the end of the 1970s, and now we really have a renaissance in the railroads right now going on, and we've got to be able to keep tied in to that, because railroads are growing because of many factors have been mentioned here. So again, Corvell as a major shipper shouldn't be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you. John, did you have some comment?
Yes, I'm John Williams, and I'm the operator. I guess when Chris and I negotiated the lease agreement, we didn't put the right milepost number down, and as I remember the negotiations process, nobody knew what the mileposts were on the NMR, but be that as it may. From my perspective, also as a former executive director in the early 90s, we actually had enough business on that railroad, both from what was then Simpson and is now California Redwood Company, and Blue Lake Lumber, to justify the rehabilitation and the startup operation, restarting the operation on the line. There was actually, as I remember, $3 or $4 million of iced tea money that's still in the bank unused, that was allocated and earmarked for the restoration. So my point would be, as Marcus said, yes, that's a very handsome California Redwood Company mill at Corbell. Yes, the lumber industry has changed. Yes, Blue Lake Lumber is no longer in business. But a solution that would permit the return of rail is one that I could support, I think. But I've been in the business almost 50 years. I see rail lines go and I see businesses come and businesses go. And I've seen a lot of mistakes made when the line is abandoned and it's gone forever. So I would ask that the board keep the option open for rail service returning to that line.
Thank you, John. John?
I had my turn earlier, but I have to address one thing. With the county, I did things and got things moving, and I did them quicker, and I did it by getting rid of all the old crap type of stuff. And one thing, for instance, our budget went from an 1.5-inch document that we brought to the board to 4 pages. They loved me for that. I think that's the only reason they kept me around. Rail banking gets rid of all this crap as to who owns it, who's got an easement, what the thing is. You have an operating railroad there, or did have an operating railroad. Nobody denies that you had a railroad right-of-way. That's all you have to say, I'm going to rail bank. You don't have to look at the deeds. You don't have to go back through the ownerships. You don't have to go to a title company. I don't recommend that you go through that step because it's unnecessary, it's time-consuming, and it is just a pain in the neck unless you hire a title company to do it for you. So you don't need the step. I mean, I'll provide the deeds that I have so you can just take a look at them, but it doesn't matter whether you have an easement, doesn't matter whether you own fee title, doesn't matter whether you have an easement for trails, who knows what. You don't need that step.
Thank you. I'm not sure there's agreement up here that we don't need the step, and we have a method for handling it. I don't think the process would move much faster by the time we get the other pieces of the information to incorporate that process of at least understanding what our ownership interest is. I think you've got our support here on this. We may disagree a little bit on how we get there, so, but I haven't seen anybody up here who's opposed to this concept of moving and it becoming an action item very soon here. So. John?
Yeah, I felt the same too when listening to John, but I also believe what Alan, you're saying, and what Bernie are going to do is take the nut of that question. Is a cure-all, is rail banking truly the cure-all for the type of real properties that we're looking at? And that's the question I think Nancy Bittner or Vite, whatever, is really, that's who we can go to that for that question and get her to put in writing back to us whether or not it would be that cure-all. Then to council, I think, if that's what we get, then council can then, our council, can look at that squarely with Bernie's help, and then we can resolve that right away. The next step is really the management issues. I think we're probably going to get to this solution pretty quickly, but it's the management issues that really are going to take more time.
I think, and within that analysis will be, what is the definition of being the short-term manager, and can we be pretty well assured if the NCRA wants to, on a de facto basis, without a huge investment, step into that role in a custodial fashion until we can do a handoff, and what might that handoff look like? I think this speaks to some of the concerns that were raised here. I don't personally have any problem with the NCRA, being the midwife on this thing. I just don't want to be the mother and father of it forever. So, unless that's different than what somebody else agrees to. Well, I think we have a direction here, Bernie.
I just want to point out to the fellow from the union, it is a different situation from Arcata to Blue Lake than from Arcata South. And trying to look at my notes here. As to Mr. Williams, I'm hoping that the report that comes back will satisfy you that what we're suggesting here does exactly what you want. You're not going to build out to Corbell momentarily, and when you want to, it's going to be there. I know it was. And then somebody said there's some manufacturing facility at the west end of Annie and Murray. My view is that if in fact there is, we don't have to rail bank that portion. Where we could, and we just get it back at such time as we want to get it back. You don't have to do the whole thing. You can do just some small or incremental portions. In that respect, I'm going to suggest to the board, if it is interested, and the public, and most particularly to the Friends of Annie and Mary, if you want to see how to go about doing this, go to the STB's website. It is STB as in Bernard, .DOT as in Department of Transportation, .gov as in government. Go to the E, that's capital E, A, B, C, D, E, library. Go to filings, click on full text search, go to AB, capital A, capital B, and then there'll be a number after it, and there'll be an X, a small X following that number. And then for the filing type, go to Notice of Exemption, and you'll see what the applications look like. As to Mr. Murray, I think he's right on when he responds to Mr. Neary's view as to whether we have to look at the deeds, but let's let that go for the moment. Mr. Neary and I will confer, and I think that we'll agree eventually that Mr. Murray's position is right on. So that's it.
Well, the only thing I'll take exception to what you just said, Bernie, if there's fee simple ownership that we have on things there, then it's property. And if it's property, there's a financial element of that that we need to know before we make this decision. So that's why that process may be important. So bear that in mind when you make your decision and come back with a recommendation. That we're really going to have to move along here. We're going to take a short 5-minute biological break here for all the old guys, and then we'll come back in just 5 minutes. Let's reconvene right after 12 o'clock.
Okay. Rolling. Yep.
How you doing, young man? Good. How are you? You were right on today.
Oh, they just keep talking about trails and
Who's going to be? Who's in charge of the maintenance of the trail? Nobody wants that one. If you've noticed, no one talks about the maintenance of a trail. No.
How are you doing?
Hey, how are you, Dave? Yeah. Yeah, I go to my country a lot. I go to Europe. I'm from France originally. Yeah, the railroads are a big thing in France. Yeah, you bet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. They're totally subsidized. 100%. You know? Yeah, the price of gas is $6. We're going to see it $5 before the year's out here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. You know? And people are going to start screaming about, why isn't the railroad running? You're going to hear that one. We can't sustain those trucks. Too much. Thank you.
You got there, fishing rod blanks?
Down the Russian River, are this the same family that don't live in Sawmill out at Riverville?
Just to get the property correct,
Sure, www.s as in Sam, T as in Thomas, B as in Lori, STB, Service Transportation dot DOT, Department of Transportation, dot GOV.
How are you, brother? How are you?
I am
I enjoyed what you were saying.
Thank you. See you again this afternoon.
Yeah, the videotape
See their website. And
yeah, but you know,
play around with it, but if you want to see these applications, rail by
really,
library.
they should abandon
Once you get that, go to
Canyon.
That's the route we have now. And trying to get a new route is going to be very expensive.
Yeah, but when we say old routes, now it should be
All routes,
engineering
though,
prices going up now.
all routes, though, you're going to have a problem getting out. Just like all our roads have a problem getting
You'll
out.
see a whole bunch of file
Yeah, 24 of us up here.
Oh, yeah.
Always has been, always will be.
Every single road's got slippage on it.
Number 5. Number 6, number 7, number 8. Number 9,
Either
it's the ones
on
that
the
are interesting.
solid side or on the river,
Filing
on the river side, or on the ocean side, on the sub portion.
John Murray, you bet. Boy, he was
Nothing solid.
Yeah,
That's terrific.
I don't have
I'm gonna have to zip up for the rest of the motor line and be in trouble.
Worse was every time we have an earthquake,
Charles,
we get a little more.
When I heard you, had to go off and see grandchild
Even in
school,
City
boy, that
Street,
sounds pretty good.
sidewalks here in Eureka.
That's the only one that I haven't just admitted. There is one more. From,
Thank you.
this one's from Trocadero. Yeah. Okay.
Not today.
staff should actually follow the board. I don't have.
No. There must be a way between the rail service.
Oh, well, that's all I'm for. That's what
Trail,
we put
it's like one zone.
just like the stuff back here with the railroad.
They say the railroad is a necessity. There is no railroad in this location. It doesn't appear, or somebody else has to make that finding, that there will be one in the near future. So give us the right to put a trail in there.
So I don't really have any other questions, but thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Yes, I do. Okay. Is the agreement chairperson name right? Number. Okay.
Between Arcade and Eureka. Well, we certainly considered that when we met in January.